This week on Capitol Journal, it was a busy week of budget hearings in the State House as lawmakers and agency directors discussed the financial needs of the state. We'll break it all down, plus Senate Education Budget Chairman Arthur Orr and Senate General Fund Budget Chairman Greg Albritton join me in studio to discuss the details. Senator Clyde Chambliss, who serves as Majority Whip, also joins us to discuss his election integrity bills and the latest with prison construction. And Bibb County Sheriff Jody Wade and Deputy Chris Poole are in studio for an emotional interview about their support for a prison reform bill named after their colleague killed in the line of duty. It's all next on Capitol Journal. From our State House studio in Montgomery, I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal. The building was abuzz this week as lawmakers and state agency directors gathered for budget hearings, the annual fiscal meetings preceding the legislative session. Tuesday started with the American Rescue Plan Act Oversight Committee. Wednesday saw general fund agencies present their budget requests, and Thursday focused on education agencies. While the state's budget outlook is mostly healthy, many agency heads described difficulty keeping up with inflation and finding available employees. That is a particular problem in the Department of Corrections and the Department of Mental Health. Capitol Journal's Karen Goldsmith attended the budget hearings and has a full report.
Typically during a legislative session, more than 1,000 bills will be introduced while hundreds will pass. But lawmakers are only constitutionally required to pass the state budgets. Hearing budget requests is a key part of the budget passing process. House and Senate General Fund Committee members heard from several agencies, including the Alabama Law Enforcement Agency. Secretary Hal Taylor is requesting an additional $31 million for fiscal year 2024. Updating their drone equipment is one of the issues he wants to address.
The drone program for us has been incredible. We use those drones to fly hostage negotiations, looking for missing people. We use them to fly the interstate or wherever there's been an accident. We can now, what used to take 2 to 3 hours to go out and recreate a traffic homicide investigation, we can fly that in roughly 15 to 30 minutes and go in and plug that into a computer base and recreate that scene.
The state's Department of Corrections wants an additional $95 million state dollars. Their commissioner says $13 million of that would be used for
cell phone interdiction systems for 3 facilities. Outside of staffing, that is our main problem we have at Department of Corrections. Cell phones, contraband runs everything else. So we do searches on a daily basis. We recover cell phones, but as fast as we recover them, they replace them.
Senate General Fund Budget Chair Greg Albritton is encouraging his colleagues to move cautiously.
We've got the DOC with an increase of $95 million. Medicaid with $70 million increase. We've got mental health with a $41 million increase, and we've got DHR with an $84 million increase. And that's just the 6 agencies that we have here today. Between inflation and other matters, if you term it that, the increasing in demands on the general fund is very significant. Very often we get caught up in the issues of that we want to do good for people and we want to help everybody and we want to do everything else but when we start having these increases, accumulation like we have, that's where we need to be conscious of where we're headed, or where we may be headed where we don't want to go.
For Capitol Journal, I'm Karen Goldsmith.
On the education side, State Superintendent Eric Mackey is requesting a budget increase of $984 million for K-12 schools. Most of that funding would be used to increase teacher salaries and recruit new teachers, as well as principals and counselors. Teacher shortages have plagued Alabama's public education system for years, with the state's greatest shortage areas being in special education, early childhood, and elementary teachers.
more teachers, teachers highly qualified, teachers supported. I talked this morning quite a bit about our successful letters program, getting our early childhood teachers prepared and ready to teach better literacy. And that's very important to us. And so we have to pay for that training. We have to pay teachers to go through it. And I believe in that carrot approach. Give teachers a stipend for completing that. We want to get more CALTs. Those are our certified academic language therapists into our schools. We've gone from 0 to 97. We need at least one in every school district, which means we'd have to have 150. And of that 97, some of them, multiples are in one district. So we have districts that don't have a CALT. We need to get those certified academic language therapists out there in all of our schools. So it's about getting money to the classroom, more teachers highly qualified is really the biggest part of our budget request.
Dr. Barbara Cooper, Secretary of the Department of Early Childhood Education, didn't make a specific budget request, but did discuss the goal of increasing access to the state's award-winning first-class pre-K program. Cooper wants 70% of 4-year-olds to have access, whereas right now it's about 44%.
Given all that we know about the benefits of early childhood education, our goal is to continue expansion until we reach our state's goal of 70% access for 4-year-old children. The counties in green before you are already at 70% access. The blue counties are above the state average of 44%, and the purple counties are below the state average. We use this data to help prioritize our outreach. So, of course, we want to go to those places that have the least access. Governor Ivey has asked the department to prioritize creating pre-K classrooms in counties where more than 20% of the population falls below the federal poverty guidelines. Approximately 37 classrooms are needed to reach full access of 70% in all 19 of these counties.
Cam Ward, Director of the Bureau of Pardons and Paroles, gave lawmakers an update on the mandatory supervised release of 421 inmates earlier this month under a 2021 law. He said the inmates under his agency's supervision are equipped with ankle monitors, as the law requires.
13 monitors have already been removed because the client EOS'd. They've already end of sentenced and they're no longer in Alabama's jurisdiction. Of the number of people, that 421 who have committed a new violation, of 421 we had 10 people commit new offenses, and almost all of them had something to do with drugs or paraphernalia. There were some small property crimes, but that's the statistics there. So of new offenses, so we've had 2.3% reoffend. All of those were our parole officers involved. We were able to be involved in making sure that person went back to prison. And we also had 14 devices removed because when the person was released, there was an outstanding warrant for them in a county jail. They were immediately taken to the county jail where the device was removed, and that way they can serve their time until they go to their next case with the particular county they were sent to.
State Finance Director Bill Poole updated lawmakers on how the state is spending its portion of federally allocated American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, funds. The legislature appropriated the first $1.1 billion last year and has another $1.1 billion to appropriate this year. The first round of funds went to shore up hospitals and nursing homes, rebuild water and sewer infrastructure, expand broadband internet in rural areas, and to help fund the construction of 2 new men's prisons. Legislative leaders have been meeting with the Governor Kay Ivey and her staff about how to spend the second round of ARPA funds, and a plan is expected in the coming weeks. Poole said it would be key to continue following the strict rules on the uses for the funds set out by Congress and the Treasury Department.
The state of Alabama has received no negative audit findings at this point on any ARPA funds. Those funds were administered very quickly and very efficiently through the Department of Finance to the receiving entity and out to field. The administrative costs, we believe, have been held below 1% of total funds. We believe we've outperformed potentially any state in the union in terms of that administrative cost limitation. A lot of states went out and hired consultants to come in and administer their programs. The funds were distributed pretty quickly, I think very efficiently from finance out to the entities. The reporting is occurring very efficiently to U.S. Treasury, so I'm pleased that we've been able to accomplish that for very low administrative costs. So I believe that at this point, you can be pleased with the efficiency and the effectiveness relative to the administration of these funds, as well as the transparency and the traceability of the same.
In addition to the ARPA funds, Poole said Alabama's application for federal dollars from the Capital Projects Fund has been approved. The state's nearly $192 million will be invested in broadband internet expansion efforts. Bibb County Sheriff's Deputy Brad Johnson was shot and killed last year by a man authorities said had his prison sentence shortened under Alabama's Good Time Behavior Incentive Law. This, despite escaping from a prison work release center a few years earlier. This week in the State House, Johnson's fellow officers spoke out in favor of reforming that law via a proposal from State Senator April Weaver. The bill also picked up the support of Lieutenant Governor Will Ainsworth and House Speaker Nathaniel Ledbetter, who said the good time system should be tightened to incentivize truly good behavior behind bars.
Ever so often, a tragic event reveals a flaw that needs to be corrected, and the loss of Deputy Johnson, along with the wounding of Deputy Poole, offers strong evidence that Alabama's system of awarding good time credit is broken and needs to be repaired.
Alabama's system of awarding good time credits to inmates is more liberal than California's. Our state awards more than double credits that California does. Alabama should not be more liberal than California in anything, especially in allowing inmates to be set free before their sentences end.
I'll speak with Sheriff Jody Wade and Deputy Chris Poole about this bill later in the show. Well, it's a long way from Enterprise, Alabama to the boardrooms of some of the top banks on Wall Street. But for one Troy alum, that's exactly how far he's gone. This week, he returned to Alabama to offer advice to students at his alma mater. Capital Journal's Randy Scott reports.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
A few years ago, Derek Ellington was a student majoring in computer science and business administration at Troy University. He was recruited to play football, but used that same energy to hit the books and obtain his degree. But today, he's a special guest speaker to students in the very same building he took classes in to help him succeed in the business world.
I was you between 1988 and 1992. So today's presentation isn't about me, it's about you and what you're going to do with the training and experiences you get here.
Ellington has worked in the banking industry for nearly 30 years and is now an executive vice president for Wells Fargo Bank and the head of its small business banking division, handling millions of dollars for small business clients annually. He started as a teller, but worked his way up the ladder thanks to some tips he's sharing with students.
You must commit to being a lifelong student of your industry craft, always being green and growing.
Another tip from sports, the importance of being a team player.
You must master operating in a team environment and develop skills that strengthen the team while also building skills that are transferable to other units inside and outside of your company.
Other ideas involve building a good image.
Build a personal brand that is built to last. What I mean by that? First, be known for having a positive attitude.
For Capital Journal, I'm Randy Scott.
Enterprise really punching above its weight these days. We'll be right back with tonight's guests.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org.
Joining me next are Senator Arthur Orr, chairman of the Senate Education Budget Committee, and Senator Greg Albritton, Chair of the Senate General Fund Budget Committee. Gentlemen, thanks for coming on Capitol Journal.
Thanks for having us.
I know it's been a busy week with budget hearings. You've had really 3 days of budget hearings if you count the ARPA oversight budget committee hearing, and then general fund agencies, education agencies. Senator Orr, I'll start with you. What were your kind of general takeaways from this week of budget talks?
Well, as we've discussed, and your viewers probably know, the education budget will have a substantial surplus, and that's something we'll need to discuss how we're going to use that or spend that or save that or send some back to the people. And then the general fund, maybe not as much, but two very different budgets, two very different situations as far as the cost. On the education side, one of the things I think is interesting is 2025, and people, we'll be working on the 2024 budget this legislative session, but 2025, the federal funds will dry up related to COVID. So we're going to have to backfill with state dollars a lot of those federal fund dollars that are being used for coaches, for literacy, mathematics, and other good things in the education system. So we're going to need to put some back and make sure we save and are ready for that day when those federal dollars go away.
Senator Albritton, what were some of your big takeaways from this week?
The number and amount of asks that came in. We've had budget hearings throughout the year trying to gear up because of inflation and other matters, and that is quite reflective in yesterday's reports and today's reports, because not only are the asks going up and the use of federal money is running out, but should a recession hit, the revenues will be declining. So we could be in for some tough times, and we have to plan for the worst case scenario. We can't live on roses and puppy dogs.
Well, you have new lawmakers, right? We're beginning a new term, and so you have something like 35, 37 new members of the legislature. Did you see them participating? What were they engaged in these budget talks as well?
They were. One of the things that was impressive this last couple of days is the attendance level and the participation level. Usually the presentations are made and we sit there and say thank you very much, but this past 2 days it was very engaging, and some difficult questions and even more interesting responses.
Mm-hmm. Senator, I noticed that you had a couple of new ETF committee members on the panel today.
Yeah, we've got a few new ones. They were up on the stage, but most of them were out in the audience and listening and trying to kind of put their arms around the intricacies of planning a budget and learning all the kind of difficulties that may be ahead.
We talk about, you mentioned the surplus in the education budget, something around 20%, kind of unheard of. There's talk of tax rebates. We've talked about this a little bit. The governor's talked about it. Maybe not a permanent tax cut because this is a temporary situation, but maybe a tax rebate. What should we expect going into the session? Have y'all been in communication with the governor's office, the House? I mean, where do we stand?
Well, I still think it's to be determined. I saw where a couple members had suggested we just put it aside and put it in a trust fund and try not to spend it at all. For me, as the chairperson, I think we can do a lot of things, part of that being a rebate, sending a good portion back to the people, also saving a good portion. Chairman Albritton makes the excellent point about the future and a recession and the economy and what do we know when the education budget gets hit terribly when income taxes go down and also sales taxes go down. And both of those are very economically related to the economy where we are with that. So all that to say, I can see a savings account, a rebate, maybe some tax cuts, smaller in nature, but targeted to help, for me, I would say our retirees and those at the other end of the spectrum to help people, working families and helping them with their taxes. So a lot of voices out there, but to be determined.
Well, it's interesting you talk about the future because you're right. You see the 20%, you see the dollar figure now, and so it's okay. Let's act on this right now. But 5 years from now, if there's some kind of recession, if there's some kind of budget cuts in the future, well, you'll get blamed for that as well, right?
That's correct.
So I guess as a lawmaker, as a budget writer, you've got to be thinking into the future.
That's correct.
Senator Albritton, let me ask you about prisons. This came up during the general fund budget hearings.
It always does.
Well, of course. I mean, we were sort of preparing for how we were going to cover it. I'm like, well, let's make sure to be there for the prison commissioner's comments. I found his comments interesting because he didn't mince words. He was actually asking for advice. Hey, do you have a good idea for how to hire prison guards? Because they're having so much trouble meeting that federal mandate. You asked a good question too. What's the end game here? How do we actually fix the problems that exist in the prison system, even though funding has gone up? What did you glean from his responses?
Good question. I'm sorry I asked it. Listen, we can't hire people. We not only have a workforce and employment circumstance in Alabama, but nationwide we have it. But particularly in Department of Corrections, it's difficult to hire people when they are unsure that they'll be able to come home from their shift. It's a dangerous place. It's more dangerous than any place you can go to in Alabama. And until we make those places safer, we're going to continue to have that problem. We hope and we believe that we're on the right track with the prison construction, because those will be more cells rather than dormitories. They'll have much more safety features in them.
Modern,
secure.
Exactly.
And we believe that's going to be a part of the answer. It won't be the full answer, but it will be a significant matter that most people will be able to understand that when they go to work, they should be able to return home. That's going to be a major step forward in getting people hired.
Let me switch gears to mental health. This is actually an area of the budget that you both have some oversight over. It strikes me because it was one of the more engaged conversations this week. A lot of lawmakers on the panel asking questions of Commissioner Boswell, a lot of back and forth because people have their own personal stories and everything. And it just strikes me because, we were talking about before, 10, 15 years ago, mental health was kind of like the stepchild and just kind of ignored a little bit, forgotten. Now it's very much in the spotlight, very much a focus of the legislature, which I suppose is a good thing. But they also mentioned a workforce shortage. Hey, we'd like to have more clinics and things like that, but they're also seeing workforce issues. What's the future there? What did you take away from Commissioner Boswell's presentation? I'll start with you, Senator Orr.
Thank you. I go back a decade when we were coming out of the Great Recession and we were looking at double-digit general fund budget cuts, and the mental health department suffered a huge cut several years running to its budgets and operations. And the reason for that is, we couldn't cut prisons, can't let the prisoners out, couldn't cut Medicaid, got to keep the maintenance of effort to get the federal dollars and keep people, in health insurance. We couldn't cut DHR with the children and the outreach. And unfortunately, we're reaping what we sowed a decade ago. And so, thanks to Chairman Albritton and others, the House Chairman, been able to claw it back. The feds also requiring the closure of mental health hospitals and things of that nature. I think, again, with COVID has, whether it's the young people or others resorting to alcohol abuse, drug abuse, et cetera, I think COVID has a lot to do with the increased demand for mental health services across our state. But what I see in this legislature is a real commitment to putting our money where our mouths are, and fortunately Chairman Albritton has some money and will help certainly on the education side to catch up and do what we need to do to address our mental health needs across the state.
Senator?
Senator Orr is correct. Everything that you laid out there is the perfect example of the storm and the seeds, whatever analogy you want to use. We have what we thought we wanted to get, and it's not helpful for Alabama. We are making some strides. Look, there's two basic problems. One is you got to have a place to keep people, to put people, to treat people. And number two is you got to have trained personnel that can identify, isolate, and train and treat. We're making some progress with getting the facilities, the places to be able for people to go to for treatment. But we don't have anybody to treat them. We don't even have a means to train people to come in and treat them. That's been completely ignored. We're trying to play catch up. It's going to be a tough road. Yeah, we talk about surplus, and I'll point this out. The general fund has $300 million extra, if you will, that we haven't spent. But in yesterday's hearings, we had an increase request out of only, I think there were 6 agencies. Every one of them took up that $300 million, more than that.
So they all requested the amount of the surplus total.
Well, their accumulation exceeds what we have left over, and we haven't heard from the others yet.
Right.
So the idea that we're flush with cash is not accurate, to use a nice TV term. But we are trying to get to a point where we can have the resources to deal with the issues that Alabama's plagued with and have been plagued. Prisons again. Last time we built a prison was, what, 50 years ago? It's been a long time. And now we're having to catch up for that past half century. It's a difficult time, and in particularly with a questionable economy and the appearance of how well off we are. That's part of the issues.
Well, you mentioned that. I remember Director Cam Ward was talking about just the increased gas usage and things like that, gas prices, inflation. Did you hear that sort of across the agencies of gas prices, inflation really spiking budget costs up?
Gas prices and personnel costs, and with the inflation of both of those, is eating us up.
Senator, let me ask you about higher education. We just heard from Jim Purcell from AIC about his budget presentation, but it struck me talking to you earlier about the difference in tuition that has really spiked. We've seen several reports about not just one or two, but lots of colleges across the state really increased tuition. But as a state, we're not exactly at the bottom in terms of how much we contribute towards universities. Is there a imbalance there?
Well, I think the imbalance comes somewhat from the past several years coming out of the Great Recession. We, again, as I said, with mental health, we underfunded substantially compared to other states higher ed. And I think they resorted to survive to increases in tuition rates. And that's created us to be now one of the higher states when it comes to state colleges, universities, in charging tuitions per FTE. But our state support has not called up to reduce the tuition amount. So we've got some work to do on higher ed, but I think parents and people paying for higher education across the state do demand a level of accountability that, the dollars that they're paying, are going to an efficiently and well-run university or college, and we don't need to be furthering administrative bloat across the universities and colleges in the state. So that's something we just need to be mindful of and not have a lot of state support and high tuition. That doesn't make any sense. So as the state support ramps up, I would expect tuition to moderate substantially.
You mentioned administrative. That's a really interesting way to put it, because you read a lot about that it's not necessarily new professors, or it's a lot of administration in these universities and everything. So is there a way that the state kind of keeps track of that legislatively, that we can keep track of sort of where universities are going?
Well, the tracking is comparing them to universities and institutions in other states and seeing what they're costing and how we rate compared to those other states and those colleges. And so that's something we're looking at to make sure that we don't continue, perhaps bad habits. And I'm not saying that they're there, but we want to be very mindful if they're charging a substantial tuition compared to other states that if that comes down as we see more state support.
Sure. Senator Albritton, let me ask you about the internet sales tax. I know that's been a huge boon for the general fund as you've...
The SSUT.
SSUT, right. And, through the pandemic, we all shopped online more, right? We all, maybe even created some habits. How is that looking going forward? Is that going to continue increasing as a share of the general fund?
Well, if the trends are accurate, and being a relatively new revenue source, we don't have a long history of that. But it looks like it's going to remain a valid, substantial source of revenue for the general fund. And my intent is to try to keep it that way.
You might get some more asks just for having said that. And
yes, I know.
Senator, you mentioned something I wanted to go back to about the federal funds drying up, and this came up in the conversation with Dr. Mackey. We've got the Literacy Act; it's seeing some success, which is really gratifying to from 2019 to finally see some of that success, not just in the ACAP scores, but in NAEP scores. You just passed the Numeracy Act last year, so maybe we'll see some success for that. But it's a little concerning to hear the superintendent say, some of these funds that, dedicated toward these big initiatives might dry up. What's the future hold?
Well, those are the federal funds. So we committed when we passed the legislation that the state was behind the supporting of both the Literacy Act and the Numeracy Act. So we're prepared to, again, put our money where our mouths are and support them. They're very important, much like pre-K. We still have some pre-K classrooms that we've got to fill, and there's still a lot of need. And if we're ever going to transform this state, it's going to be through education. I don't know many people that would argue with that point. And so particularly focusing on the early grades and getting these children able to read, able to do basic math, getting them prepared via pre-K, and then having that solid foundation when they go into the middle schools and then eventually the high schools. But what we find is when they're just socially promoted and go on to middle school, they get frustrated. The school is a real challenge. They start skipping school. All sorts of problems developed, and then of course high school, they're even worse.
Mm-hmm. Well, on the subject of education, we keep hearing about school choice, different sort of. I always say people mean very different things when they say school choice. But you're seeing draft legislation about education savings accounts, essentially allowing parents to take a portion of their tax dollars and go across the street, go wherever they want. What's the latest on that? I mean, is this a serious consideration, or is this kind of like last year, it's more of a trial balloon?
I don't know. I have not talked to the proponents. They want to meet, and I'm sure we'll be meeting here in the next couple weeks, but I don't know. And as you say, school choice means a lot to a lot of different people. Mm-hmm. And when you start looking at the difficulties posed by transportation or children with special needs, are they going to be able to be accommodated if they bring a $6,000-$7,000 voucher to a private school and need a personal aid and those kind of things that they get in the public schools? There's just a lot of different questions that would certainly need to be addressed in any school choice legislation.
Mm-hmm. Senator Albritton, I meant to ask you about this earlier, but it came up in the ARPA discussions, and that's water and sewer. The demand, far exceeded the supply of funds.
Isn't that typical?
Well, I suppose so, but I think it was a dramatic
Yeah.
So what does that tell us about our water and sewer infrastructure? I mean, the ARPA funds aren't going to be around forever. do we need more investments in state investments or local investments? There was some talk of fees across the state maybe needing to be adjusted.
Well, as far as the ARPA funds, it's been the state's position predominantly that we wanted the ARPA one-time money to go toward the future of Alabama, not to go toward the past, but to move toward the future. Water and sewer lines, that infrastructure, if we can get that in the ground, that'll give us a good generation or two. That will be a major improvement, not just for the areas that have little or none of this, but also those areas that are growing and need more. So I think there's going to be a continued effort to put more of that infrastructure in Alabama to allow for the growth and to provide 21st century services. I think that's the overall goal. Whether we get there or not, we will see. Last year's has gone well. There were in the state, every county received, should retract that. I think there were 4 counties that did not receive funding through the ARPA. They may have received funding from some other source, even from themselves. But as far as the ARPA, most every county was touched. If we can get this going again, we intend to be able to correct that, get all 4 of those covered, and also focus on those where the growth needs are occurring.
Mm-hmm. Before I let you go, I have to ask you both, where are we on special session? What's the conversation with the governor? Is it, I think you said before, maybe not at the beginning, maybe in the middle of the session. Where are we in terms of a special session specifically on ARPA and perhaps economic incentives?
If I had to guess, I would say it's probably more to the beginning.
Okay.
And
well,
as opposed,
that must mean that
it bounced around.
Okay.
It's bounced around. So I think right now that would be the projection, but it could certainly change.
I think you said y'all are both heading over to the governor's office for another meeting, so maybe it'll be updated yet again. I've taken too much of your time. I really appreciate it. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
We'll be right back.
You're watching Alabama Public Television.
Joining me next is State Senator Clyde Chambliss from Prattville. Senator, thanks for coming on the show.
Appreciate it. Look forward to visiting with you. It's always a good time to come on. I appreciate it.
Well, yeah, we're getting real near to session, so this all the talk of legislation is getting real. You've got 2 bills that were recently filed having to do with elections. Walk me through what these bills do that related to paper ballots and electronic voting.
Right. I was previously on the committee that approves election machines for the state, and as we were talking and discussing, I asked the question about paper ballots. Is there a requirement? And the answer was no, we just do that, but there's no requirement for that. And then a little bit later we were talking about modem technology and connecting to the internet or cell towers or Bluetooth, that kind of thing. And again, the answer was no, that's just what we do. And it just dawned on me that we probably need to be proactive in this regard. Let's say something happened and somebody did make that connection and something happened in one of our elections. Well, those people could not be prosecuted because it's not against the law. So for once, we want state government to be proactive and to put these 2 bills into law so that we don't have future problems.
So walk me through what they do individually.
So the paper ballot bill basically requires us to always use a paper ballot. So when we go to the polls now, we mark on our paper ballot. It goes into a vote counting machine, a computer, and then that ballot is stored at the bottom. So let's say at the end of the day, that machine is struck by lightning or just goes crazy and the data is lost. Well, we just pull the ballots out and we recount them in another machine, no harm, no foul. So the paper ballot is the key to always having an audit trail and not being able to lose those votes. And, you know, obviously in a close election, that's very, very important.
We've had a few recently.
Exactly. So the other bill, not connecting or allowing any part of the machine to be able to connect to the internet, modem, cellular, that kind of stuff. Same thing there. If somebody was to do something nefarious in the future, you know, we couldn't prosecute them because there's no law saying you can't do that. So we just want to make sure that we are forward thinking. I personally believe that we have secure and safe elections in this state, but that doesn't mean we should just back off and not look toward the future and look to future problems and try to avoid them if we can.
Mm-hmm. I have to say, I voted in a different state when I was younger, and it was a screen, you know, and there was something different about pushing a screen and, well, okay, my vote went somewhere, but that paper ballot, there is something sort of, I don't know, physical and secure about that. Let me ask you, as you've filed these bills, in your conversations with your colleagues, do you think you have the support to move it pretty quickly?
I do. We actually moved both of these bills through the Senate last session, and they were unanimous, by the way, bipartisan bills, because we all want safe and secure elections. However, I had personal issues with family that was sick with COVID, and eventually both of my parents passed away through that. And that obviously took me away from the session, so I wasn't able to really get it pushed through at the end of the session in the House. So I don't think there's really any problem with it, but just making sure we get it forced through and hopefully become law.
Mm-hmm. I was going to ask you about you know, your conversations with leadership, but you are leadership now. You're the majority whip, newly established majority whip for the Senate. What's that job going to entail?
Well, it's going to be a little bit of an expansion of what I had been doing with the floor leader.
Yeah, okay.
So I'll be doing some of that same stuff, but primarily working with the majority leader and the pro tem to make sure that the things on the floor flow smoothly. A lot of times they're involved in you know, difficult and detailed discussions and trying to work things out, and then the mid-level and the minor details just fall through the cracks. Well, that's my job, is to make sure those things don't fall through the cracks. And then when we are on the floor, that it's organized, people know where to be when they need to be, and then obviously helping to wrangle the votes to get certain legislation passed.
Session will be here before you know it. One big topic this week during both the budget hearings and the prison oversight committee meeting was the topic of these two new prisons that are being built, one in your district, the Elmore County facility. They were showing pictures of some of the progress going on. Can you update us on how that project is going?
Yes, the prison in Elmore County, the site work, all of the moving of the dirt, or earthwork I should say, is complete, and that was a monumental task. I think it's some 300 acres, and all this dirt has been moved, the pads have been leveled, the areas leveled, some I think 200 acres or so where the buildings are going to be. That's all complete. That's a lot of work that's been accomplished. Now they are out there and they're doing two things. When you have construction like this, you think, oh well, all this pad, all this is done, this earthwork's complete, but then we go in there to put in all the storm drainage and water and sewer and all that stuff, and it just kind of looks like a bomb went off for a while, and then all that'll settle down, and then the foundations and the buildings will be coming out of the floors, out of the ground. So the other things that they're doing is they're already precasting the concrete cells. They're doing that on site and stockpiling them, so that it takes a long time to do that. You got to let them cure before you can move them and that kind of thing. So they've gotten a head start on that. So then when they need them, they'll have them ready. So those two things are ongoing right now. There will be sometime probably this late spring or summer, probably 1,000 different employees or construction workers out there working. So it's moving along really well.
There was a lot of talk of that this week because, you know, the prison system is just having a terrible time finding employees, finding prison guards, essentially.
Sure.
They've raised pay. The prison commissioner was saying, look, I'd love any of your ideas, but do you think a newer, more modern facility will help that in terms of it being safer?
I personally think so. What we have to realize and understand is whatever condition that those inmates are in, the correction officers are in those same conditions. So right now you may have a room maybe the size of a basketball court or 3/4 the size of a basketball court, and you have 300 inmates in there on bunk beds. And you're asking staff, personnel, to go into that environment. And it's dangerous. So when we build these prisons, we will go from predominantly dormitory style to predominantly cell style. That is a game changer when it comes to security. There'll be electronic locks that can be locked from a control center. It will be totally different when it comes to the safety of our correctional officers. I think that's the number one key to helping us get the staffing level where we need it to be.
Mm-hmm. While I have you, I wanted to get an update on Highway 82. I drive it when I go see my parents.
Sure.
So I've seen a lot of progress being made. It looks like it's getting close.
It's getting really close. They're I think maybe a few months out of getting the 2 expanded lanes completed. So when that happens, they will move the traffic over to those 2 lanes, and then they will close down the 2 existing lanes and replace the 2 old bridges that are on there that are, number one, are old, but they're also very, very narrow. So that'll take another probably year or 2 to get that complete, and then we'll have all 4 lanes and all around close to about a $30 million project.
Yeah, long overdue. We have a lot of new lawmakers in the legislature this term. It starts next week. You've got a couple of brand new lawmakers in your district, Representative Troy Stubbs, Representative Jerry Starnes. How have they been adjusting? We had Mr. Stubbs on the show here, but how are you finding your new colleagues?
Well, those 2 are great, and fortunately I've been able to work with them over the years. Representative Stubbs, as a chairman of the county commission, matter of fact, on prisons, we met hundreds of times regarding that issue. But when I was on the city council in Prattville, Jerry and I were elected at the same time, so we served on the council together. So I'm excited about those 2 coming on board and really having some teamwork and some help in the House to do good for our district.
Right. Well, we're out of time, but I appreciate you coming on the show.
It goes so fast. Thank you
so
much.
All right. We'll be right back. Joining me next are Bibb County Sheriff Jody Wade and Deputy Chris Poole. Gentlemen, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having us.
Y'all are in the State House this week advocating for the Deputy Brad Johnson Act. It has to do with reforming the state's good time prison law, sponsored by April Weaver and Russell Bedsole. Sheriff, if I'll start with you. Talk to me about why this bill is so important to you, and maybe describe the events that led to the naming of this bill.
I think the importance of this bill is for public safety, for the safety of the citizens of Alabama and the safeties of the officers that serve. I believe that had April Weaver's law already been in place, that this would not have occurred, and Chris wouldn't have been shot, and Brad would still be with us.
Well, Deputy Poole, you were there that day. You were obviously involved in the incident. Can I get you to walk me through what happened from your first-person perspective?
Yes, sir. So myself and Deputy Johnson, we received a call, and we responded to the call like we would on any call. We began chasing a vehicle that was stolen. We come over almost at April's driveway. And as soon as I come over the hill, I was immediately met by gunfire. I was shot. I said, Brad, don't chase him. I was immediately shot. I didn't know at the time that Brad was already shot. I started calling over the radio for April Weaver. I knew she was a nurse. Her husband was a doctor. Miss Pat ended up April's mom ended up getting in touch with Daryl, and Daryl got over there and gave aid to Brad. So this bill is very important to me in Brad's honor.
Mm-hmm. You lost a colleague, you lost a fellow officer, so I know that is very difficult. I appreciate you because I know it's emotional and difficult. But the circumstances around that were that this person, this shooter, was an escaped inmate, correct, and had accrued good time off of his sentence for good time in prison, that is being drawn into question. Was it really, should he have accrued to this good time? And that's why this legislation would reform exactly how that's construed. Is that correct?
Absolutely, and I understand the concept, and I believe when it was first enacted, it was a good thing. It was to protect the corrections officers and to give the inmates incentive to behave better and try to improve themselves so they could come out on the other side a better person. Mm-hmm. I mean, I believe in second chances like everybody does, and I know Chris got a second chance and Brad didn't, and I think this law, had it been in place, would have given that Brad that second chance.
I was going to say, because it seems like a policy that is worthwhile, right? We want to incentivize good behavior in prisons. And I was speaking with Senator Weaver a couple of weeks ago about this, in that the system's still going to be in place. It's just reformed to make sure that it's truly good behavior, not just not bad behavior. And so is that, from y'all's perspective as law enforcement officers, is that a worthy goal to keep the system but to reform it to incentivize good behavior?
I do think that could prevent this from happening in the future. I think it's going to be really a public safety issue, because when they're locked up, that is for the protection of the public and the punishment of the perpetrator. So when you're, as in this case, out roughly 3 years into a 10-year sentence, and within 3 days of being released, you shot one officer and murdered another one. So I do understand the initial purpose of the good time law, but I just feel that it's probably just overreached a little bit. It needs to be good time, not just time.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've been in the State House today interacting with some of the state's top politicians, top officials. I saw you had the Speaker, you had the Lieutenant Governor. What has been your reaction, or what has been the reaction from those you've interacted with talking about this issue, Deputy?
Everyone seems extremely sincere in trying to make this bill pass. Senator Weaver has done an amazing job trying to get this bill passed. We are so thankful to her that this is going to honor Brad and save the lives of many.
Same, the reaction from some of the state's top officials?
Oh, absolutely. We've seen nothing but support from the House and the Senate and all the officials that we met today, and we've got the support of the sheriffs around the state. Hopefully they're going to be able to reach out to their senators and their representatives to get them on board to help April Weaver get this done. It needs to be done. I think she will get it done. I have all the faith in the world in her and the people that are assisting her in this, and I hope everybody does. The issue, as far as the personal issue of her, she loves her citizens and the people she represents, and she wants to protect them and keep them safe, and law enforcement. With this incident occurring literally at her driveway, and her husband, Dr. Darrell Weaver, coming there and rendering what aid he could to Brad as this occurred, it hits home to her. And I think that is what's driving her, and I think that's her passion for seeing this act get passed.
Mm-hmm. There are some critics of the bill saying that it might lead to increased overcrowding. We do have overcrowded prisons. Sometimes that trickles down into the county jails, correct, in terms of overcrowding. Are there any concerns about that? And from a local perspective, what are your thoughts on overcrowding?
Well, and I understand they have their issues with overcrowding like we have our issues with understaffing. Mm-hmm. I'm understaffed at my jail at this time. Trying to recruit and retain people is very difficult right now, and we're doing the best we can. So I understand, but with those issues, we still have to do our job that we're tasked with, and we do the best we can. And I know that they're doing the best that they can, and I hope they're able to improve this and find a solution to the problems they have, but it shouldn't be a problem that we have to take care of. When they are released and if they're on probation or parole, When they violate, they don't go back to prison, they go to the county jail. So somebody that's released from the prison, like in this early release program they just had, when those people reoffend, they come to our jails. And we are understaffed.
We're almost out of time, but Deputy, I wanted to give you another chance to say what Deputy Johnson meant to you, and maybe your message to the legislature who may be watching this program.
So Deputy Johnson was an amazing man. In 2017, I had actually started reserving with him. I remember watching Brad Johnson, and he was just an amazing dude. He always seen the good in every situation. He wanted to help people, and I remember wanting exactly what he was doing. So I pursued it. He got me on as a reserve, and I just wanted to be able to change the world, and that's exactly what Brad done. And even when Brad died, he continued giving his organs to other people. So Brad's an American hero.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show. We will certainly be following this bill when the session starts in less than 2 weeks.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org.
That's our show for this week. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next week at a different time, 30 minutes later at 8 o'clock p.m. after the high school championships here on Alabama Public Television. For our Capitol Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.